friends, and welcome back to another video. So today I wanted to talk about 10 standalone books that I highly recommend. Now this list officially contains 10 books, but it does have a few honorable mentions that I will go into, but I just wanted to make it 10 and then a couple of extras that I just wanted to briefly mention at the end. Alright, so the first book that I wanted to mention is An Enchantment of Ravens by Margaret Rogerson. This is about Isabel, who's a young human painter, and she accidentally becomes entangled in this world of fairy secrets when she paints Rook the Autumn Prince and accidentally gives him a little bit of human sorrow. And I don't think that they're supposed to feel any kind of emotions, the fairies, so this is very unusual and obviously gets her entangled into all of their politics. He's really interested in her skills and her beauty, and he takes her to her kingdom to stand trial basically for accidentally making him feel sadness. She and Rook have to navigate a lot of dangers and political machinations in the courts, and they find that their bond is deepening over time, leading to forbidden love. This is such a cute, fun, standalone fantasy story. It's really great to get into the genre. It's got that romantic aspect going on as well, so it is romantasy, and it's one that I highly recommend. One of my favorites that I've ever read, and I love just the fairy court vibes. If you like A Court of Thorns and Roses, I think that you would definitely like this book. I like this book even more than A Court of Thorns and Roses, so I think that speaks for itself, but it's one that I highly recommend and I think that you will really enjoy, and it is very accessible for newcomers to the romantasy genre if you'd like to give it a try. I think it is young adult, but it doesn't read super juvenile, and there isn't a lot of spice to it, so if you're not into books that have heavy spice, I think this is a good one to try out. Alright, the next recommendation that I have is All My Rage. This is a standalone novel that follows Sal and Noor, who are two Pakistani American high school students, and they've been best friends since childhood, and they're dealing with a lot of family difficulties. Sal's mother is slowly dying, and his father is an alcoholic, and then Noor has a very resentful uncle, and a lot of things happen from there. We also get the flashbacks and perspectives of Sal's mother in Pakistan and kind of her storyline as it goes from the past leading all the way into the present day. So the chapters alternate between Sal, Noor's, and his mother's perspective, and so we kind of leave where we are with that character and then pick back up with them a couple of chapters later. It was a very deep and impactful read. I read this earlier this year, and it's one that I definitely think that you should read. Trigger warnings abound though, so I would look into those before reading this and make sure that you're in a very stable mental space. I do, however, recommend this, and it gives you a very authentic view into kind of the lives of the children of immigrants and a lot of the struggles that they face, especially those who are living in poverty or facing a lot of kind of struggles acclimating to the United States. I also feel like there is that kind of presence of being split between two cultures, which is something that I can relate to and is something that is like very present in this story, and I just want you to know that you will probably cry in this one. I definitely sobbed a few times in this book, and it takes some unexpected turns. You want everything to go so well for these characters, and they will go on an epic journey. They will really evolve in this book, but they'll come out better for it at the end. The next standalone recommendation that I have is for Recitatif. This was Toni Morrison's first short story that she published, and it's kind of about these two girls, Roberta and Twyla, who are friends, and it's about their relationship as they grow up and when they grow apart. But really the focus of the story is the fact that we get a lot of descriptions about how one of them has a very sick mother and one of them has a mother who just kind of abandons her at this orphanage, and they bond together, and you don't know the race of the girls. So one of them is black and one is white, but the whole point of the story is that you really don't know which is the black character and which is the white character, and it is kind of like an experiment that Toni Morrison did on her readers, trying to understand and really figure out how people make these biases and assumptions about which character was white and which one was black. It really gives you that kind of perspective and makes you think a lot in this story, and you're questioning a lot of your own biases in this one. Again, another really intense and a little bit of a difficult read, but I think it's one that everyone should try out. I listened to this on audio and it was a really great experience, especially because I got a little bit of a foreword and a little more information on Toni Morrison as a writer, so it helped me feel more connected to the story. I think that Recitatif is one that will really stick with you. I've really been thinking about this book ever since I read it earlier this year, and it's going to probably remain one of my all-time favorite standalones. All right, another more intense read is Muted by Tammy Charles. This book is written completely in verse, so that means it's all poetry inside, so it's not your usual prose book. And it follows a 17-year-old girl named Denver who finds that music is everything to her. She loves writing, she wants to perform, and she wants to leave her very small white hometown. She and her two best friends kind of sing their way into the orbit of this very popular R&B star, and he gives them access to a lot of things like parties, wild nights, hours of recording, and all of that. It seems like a dream until it's not. So this story kind of is so interesting at the beginning because these girls are enamored with this world of like music recording and all of that, but they don't really see the dark sides of it. But we do go on a journey with these characters. Denver finds that she ends up being trapped in this very famous singer's world, and she's kind of losing access to her own voice, her own thoughts. He's kind of controlling everything about her life, and this dream is turning into a nightmare for her. So she has to choose between having her big break and being broken, or just getting out of there, and it's really very hard to read about. It is inspired by a true story, and it's about how the music industry kind of can exploit young girls, and it was very intense. I did not expect it to go as far as it did in some of these scenes, and I read this a number of years ago in like 2020 or 2021 when I was first getting back into reading, and wow, it's really stuck with me. I think it's a very powerful story that we need to read, and we need to talk about some of the issues that happen in the music industry and the entertainment industry as a whole. Another book that I would recommend, but probably don't read Muted very close in time to this one, is Grown by Tiffany D. Jackson. This one also is a young adult novel that dives into the complex and dark realities of the music industry, and especially how Black women are targeted in this industry. So again, it's very similar to Muted. This one is written in prose though, so if you want to give this kind of concept a try but don't want to read it in poetry, you can give Grown a try. If you'd like to give the verse a try Muted, or you can read both. I've read both. But it follows this 17-year-old singer who kind of gets swept away in this glamorous world of R&B singer, and their relationship escalates, and it blurs the line between mentorship and something a lot more intense and sinister. It is initially a dream, but then the reality of it is a lot darker than we thought, and it kind of leads to a murder mystery, and there's a lot of other things going on in this one. Our main character is an unreliable narrator, and we don't really know what happens at the end of this. It takes on so many difficult topics of grooming, manipulation, and the abuse of power, very similar to Muted, which I think is very important to talk about. So you can choose between this one or Muted, and either of these books will give you a very fulfilling reading experience, but they will be very hard to read about. And again, make sure you're in a stable mindset. For the last several recommendations, I really recommend that you are in a very stable place before you pick up these books. All right, and then the next book should be the last of these very, very intense coming of age stories, and it is I'm Not Your Perfect Mexican Daughter by Erica L. Sanchez. It follows this girl named Julia, and she is a Mexican-American teenager, and she's kind of dealing with the death of her older sister Olga, who died in an accident, and she was considered like the very perfect Mexican daughter. And Julia is more rebellious, and she kind of wants to go to a college away from home. She just wants to get away from everything, and she's kind of expected to fulfill her sister's shoes and take on more responsibility after her death. But she also starts to realize that her sister's not as perfect as everyone thought she was, and it's about her kind of figuring out her identity, kind of managing the expectations of her family and everyone around her, and dealing with past tragedy and uncovering family secrets. It's definitely a very intense read, but not in the same ways as some of the other books. I think that it's a really true coming of age story that a lot of people can connect with, and especially if you are Latina, Latinx, this is one that I think you will relate to. I highly recommend this. This is one that I really adore, and I also read this so many years ago, but I really liked it that I think that you should try it out and see how you feel about it. All right, on a very different note, I'm going to recommend The Four Winds by Kristen Hanna, and it is the story of Elsa Wolcott, and she's a woman kind of living in the Great Depression time. She has a very sheltered life, and she's kind of trying to protect her family during the events of the Great Depression and dealing with the Dust Bowl and all of that. She gets married when she's very young and has children, but faces a lot of challenges like drought in the Great Plains, and her husband eventually abandons her, so she has to struggle to provide for her family, and she chooses to leave her home and go west in order to seek a better life for her children in California. It's a very interesting story. It is kind of more about this woman's journey through her life and kind of about her surviving and overcoming the odds. So it's about family and love and those relationships and just the lengths that you will go to protect and care for your children. It's a very interesting kind of background with the Great Depression kind of going on in it, and it's one that I really enjoyed. I really liked some of the themes in this one. I like that there is hope and there is this sense of resilience in spite of being battered down by all these tragedies, by being abandoned by her spouse, by all of these natural disasters and things happening. Elsa still perseveres, and I find that very admirable. I think this is a really good one for people who are already kind of established in the historical fiction genre and would like to try out some more. I don't know that I would necessarily recommend this one for newbies to the genre, but it is very detailed and very poignant, so I think that it's one that you will really appreciate if you like historical fictions. On a very different note, my next recommendation is Something to Talk About by Meryl Wilsner. This is a sapphic romance, so it's women love women in this one, and it is about this powerhouse Joe who is photographed making her assistant laugh, and it makes them look like they're a couple, and they're declared so, and this causes a scandal which is coming at the worst time possible because Emma, the assistant, is looking for promotion and for a new role in her boss's movie, and the gossip is spreading about the relationship and it starts to really affect their lives, and they have paparazzi following them everywhere, their coworkers treat them differently, and a source is feeding them information, but they always have to comment no comment, and it kind of affects the launch of Joe's new film project that's approaching, and they end up actually spending more time together because of these rumors, which is quite ironic, and they really get along very well. Emma has a sixth sense for knowing Joe's needs, and Joe is always aloof and outwardly cold, but she ends up opening up and being more connected to Emma, and they begin to realize that the rumor may not just be a rumor, that it may be true, and that it might be worth acting on the spark. So it's a very lovely sapphic romance. I think that it's a good one for people who are kind of trying to dive into more LGBTQ plus romances. I think this was one of Berkeley's first sapphic romances that they've ever published, so take that as you will, and I enjoyed the story. Again, I don't think this is one that will maybe make you think about it for a very long time necessarily, but it's just a good fun ride, and I recommend it for that reason alone. I just really love the story in here. I love that they don't want to be together because they don't want to fulfill that prophecy of Emma trying to sleep her way up into a higher position, but they can't really fight their feelings, and it is one that I really flew through. I read this in 2 or 3 days and I absolutely enjoyed it. All right, my last main recommendation is for With the Fire on High by Elizabeth Acevedo. It follows a 17-year-old girl who is a teen mom, and she dreams of becoming a chef, and she's trying to navigate her senior year of high school and also her life as a single mother. She loves cooking, she has a great passion for that, and her family is really encouraging her to pursue this, and it kind of explores these themes of teen parenthood, creativity, and the support of a family and community and the effects that can have. So it's really a coming of age story. It's a beautiful story, and she really has so much support from her grandmother and from her community, and I love to see that in this one. It is the book that introduced me to Elizabeth Acevedo's writing and really got me into reading a lot of her backlist, so it's one that I highly recommend for that reason alone, and it's one that I think you will fly through. It's beautiful. She goes on a class trip to Spain, I think, in this one, and it is a lovely time. Such a contrast from some of the deeper coming of age stories that I mentioned earlier, but this is just a fun one that I really enjoyed. All right, so that leads me on to one of my 2 honorable mentions, and that is for Clap When You Land by Elizabeth Acevedo. This is one of my favorite books of hers, and it follows the story of 2 sisters, Yahaira and Camino, and it is written in verse, so it's about them finding out about each other's existence after their father's death in a plane crash, and they're separated by distance and by country. Yahaira lives in New York and Camino lives in the Dominican Republic, and they obviously find out that their dad had 2 different families, and it's about them coping with their grief and trying to figure out who their father really was. And we get a dual perspective in this, which I really like stories like that, where you get to really navigate the kind of grief and the loss from both angles, and we learn so much about family secrets. And it is a story also about their sisterhood, about them connecting, and kind of their cultural identity, and it's one that I really appreciated as someone who is Latinx, and also just this crazy story of their father having 2 separate families. It is one that really stuck with me, and I think it's a really interesting one to dive into. I just recommend all of Elizabeth Acevedo's books wholeheartedly. I love them so much, and this has to be one of my favorites, but I will read almost anything that she writes. She writes in a way that is just so evocative and evokes so many emotions in you that I just think it is really great to dive into and you'll really enjoy. All right, and then the last honorable mention that I have is In the Time of the Butterflies by Julia Alvarez. This one is set in the Dominican Republic, similar to Clap When You Land, which also is partly set in the DR. And it takes place in the 1960s, and then also I think in a future timeline. But it follows three sisters who have been found dead on the coast of the DR, and their deaths are officially reported as an accident, but we don't think it is an accident because they were really opposing Rafael Trujillo's leadership, and everybody knows that the Mariposas were really at the head of this rebellion against him. So it's really the story of the four sisters kind of speaking across the decades to share what their lives were like growing up under this regime, and also it is about how they died as martyrs and their memory lives on through their sister that lived, Dede, as she shares their stories. It was a really poignant, intense read. I read this one for school and I still remember it. I read it in like 2018 or 2019, and I remember so many details about this book, which is pretty surprising because so many stories I read just kind of fade over time. But this is one that I think you should definitely try out, and especially to learn more about just the rule of Trujillo, the dictatorship that happened in the Dominican Republic, and really develop empathy for people living through these circumstances. It's one that I will always recommend, and I think that you should definitely pick it up if you haven't yet. All right, so those are some standalone book recommendations that I have for you. Are there any standalones that you'd love to recommend to me to check out? If you have any that you want to recommend, leave them down below in the comments. And if you want to share anything else, you can leave it in the comments down below. If you like this video, give it a like and subscribe, and I'd love to see you in the next video. Thank you so much for watching, and wherever you are in the world, whether it's morning, afternoon, or evening, I hope that you are doing well, and I'll see you for the next one. Bye!